Aloha mai, I'm Rick Barboza. I come from Waimanalo, and I'm co-owner of Huiku Maoli Native Hawaiian Plant Nursery and Landscaping Company. Also co-founder of Papahana Kua'ola. A career in doing what we do is pretty easy, and if you have the passion for it. If a lot of times when you're in school, people like to take the natural history classes or the ethnobotanical classes because they think it's an easy A. And that's not the kind of mentality you should have when you're pursuing a career in this. I mean, for me, it's really easy because I'm extremely passionate about anything that has to do with Hawaii's natural history, Hawaii's culture. And that's kind of what drew me into it. It actually started off as a hobby. And from the hobby, I was fortunate enough to extend it into a career. So when I was at UH, my major was zoology because that kind of covered most of the biological sciences. And I started off as a marine biology person. And in marine biology, you had to learn scientific names of everything that you studied, from the fish to the limu to the corals, and trying to figure out how to remember scientific names was a challenge. But then once you kind of get the hang of it and you start to understand it, it kind of made it easy for me once I started to learn about plants. And with the plants, came into play because I grew up in Waimanalo, and Waimanalo is kind of like the nursery capital of Oahu, and my interest towards native plants started to come into, came about because, we grew up surrounding ourselves with plants that we thought was Hawaiian, or that we believe or think is Hawaiian, like plumeria and puakenikeni and pikake. And once I found out that those weren't native to Hawaii, nor were they even Polynesian introduced, then I wanted to know, well, what are Hawaiian plants, because and that is what piqued my interest in Hawaiian plants. And I always thought it would be cool to have some native plants at my parents' house. And being that we're in Waimanalo, just go check out the nurseries, buy some native plants. But nope, that wasn't the case. None of the nurseries had native plants, and if they did, they had naupaka or maybe some lehua. But there's a lot of plants out there that are native to Hawaii that most people don't even know about. And so when once I realized that nobody had any native plants, then I started reading on some books about native plants and plant propagation. And me and my friend Kapaliku Sherman, we both from Waimanalo, and we both took up Hawaiian plants as a hobby. And by trial and error, we figured out, and we're still figuring out to this day, how to properly propagate and maintain and grow plants, native plants. So Hui Kumaliola started as just kind of a hobby of mine and Matt Kapaliku Sherman's. We would go hiking, and we'd see plants, and we'd have our books with us, try ID the plant, and we'd, if they had seeds, and we would bring them down and try and propagate them at his dad's house. And his dad was really a key component to our beginnings because he allowed us to take over a lot of his yard to grow these plants. And then we also being college students, we didn't have much money, so we had to, we would go to different plant sales being held by Lion Arboretum or Foster Botanical Gardens, and whatever spare money that we had, we would buy native plants and we would put them in the ground. And from there, that was kind of very important for us to do, because when we put them in the ground, we had to try our best to figure out how to take care of them and how to grow them. And when they would produce fruit or got big enough that we could take cuttings off of them, then we had to learn how to do that. And so it was really trial and error, but luckily we were still in college at the time. And later on, I was finishing up my senior year, and Matt was already in graduate school. And we had an opportunity to provide plants to a big retail outlet. And so we took it upon ourselves to be serious about the endeavor. And we gave ourselves a year. And we told ourselves, like, okay, well, we'll try this for a year. We'll try this nursery thing for a year. And if it works out, right on. If it doesn't, then we'll just go back to school. And luckily, it's been 13 years since I've been out of school. And I've, always thought about maybe, going back to further, my degrees. But we're pretty busy right now. So I'm pretty happy to be where we're at. So this plant right here is called Akia. It's most known by the name Akia, but it's also called kauhi on other islands. And the botanical name is Wickstromia uva ursi. Not that important to us in Hawaii, other than the fact that this is probably the most, one of the most common or most used native plants in landscaping today because of its natural beauty and its hardiness. It loves hot, dry conditions, so it's a great plant for people that are into xeriscaping and trying not to use a lot of water. It's really pretty. Just the foliage alone is nice. And you can shape it and trim it into, however you want it to look. And then when it blooms, some people don't like that because the flowers are real musky smelling. It's not the most attractive scent to normal people, I guess, but for whatever reason, I'm kind of drawn to it. And maybe because I know that smells so well that I know that there's Akia someplace. But after the flowers are pollinated, and that's another thing too, is that the plants are unisex for the most part. There's some plants that have both female and male flowers, but for the most part, they're dioecious, meaning that they have one male plant and one female plant. And when the female plants get pollinated, they turn into these little fruits, and they start off green, and then they eventually turn yellow and orange, and then sometimes they turn bright red too. And when they're covered with their fruit, they're really, really pretty. They add a lot of nice color. And then plus two, Hawaiians could use them for lei. They would string up the fruit to make lei, and then it was also used as a fish narcotic to help catch shallow water reef fish. So, but yeah, it's a tough cookie, this plant. To my understanding, the bark of the plant was also used for cordage. It has really, really strong bark, and it made one of the strongest it was one of the plants that was used to make one of the strongest cordages in Hawaii. And one reference even says that it can be used for kapa as well, because this is a small. This particular species stays small, but there's over a dozen species that are native to Hawaii, and all of them are endemic, meaning that they're only found in Hawaii. And some of the species get to be over 10 feet tall and have, nice sized trunks on them that could be easily stripped. And so in addition to the cordage, the bark and also the roots would be, a bunch of them would be collected and mashed together, and they would actually put it into the water, and in areas around coral reefs where the secretion would go out and leach out into the cracks and crevices, and the fish would become intoxicated and more easy to catch. Another person also told me that they would take the mash of the bark and the roots, and they would add it to chum and actually have the fish ingest it. And so I guess that's an experiment that can be done today to figure out what would be best. Just don't eat it. The way that we propagate Akia here at Hui Kumaliola is our off of the female plants, we're able to collect fruits. And within each fruit, there is one seed. Now, the seed produces, one plant, but we can actually take all of these seeds and then we'll plant them over here in the media, in the soil. And the type of soil that we use is, we use a recycled soil mix, recycled coconut coir, and we add a little bit of perlite, which is this white stuff, and it's just superheated volcanic rock. But what the perlite does is it adds a lot of aeration into the soil so that the plants, get some oxygen down to the roots. And the way that we do it is I lay the seeds on the surface like that, and I gently push them in, and I lightly sprinkle media over it. I don't want to bury it too deep, less than 1/8 of an inch under the soil, and from there it's good to go. The reason why we don't want to plant them too deep is because if there's too much soil on above the seed, it's not going to stimulate the seed to germinate. And sometimes you want to make sure that the seeds are spaced far enough apart so that they can push through the soil. Sometimes we get so much seeds that we plant them, and if we plant them too close together, what happens is that they'll germinate all at the same time, and they'll actually push the entire level of soil above them up in the air, and then they'll get to a point where they can't support the weight, and then they just crumple up and die. So we want to make sure that we space them far enough apart and that we plant them just barely underneath the surface of the soil. And after a couple of weeks, these are about 3 weeks old. They germinate, and these guys are about to be separated out of this little community pot and put into their own individual pots. And usually they'll take anywhere from 6 to 8 months to sell, to get to a size that's large enough to sell. But that's the easiest way to propagate Akia, because usually every seed will pretty much germinate. And even prior to us planting the seeds, we'll take all of the seeds and we'll do the float test in the water, where we'll put all of the seeds in the water, and if they float up to the surface, then they're no good. All of the seeds that sink are the ones that we use to plant. And then the second method of propagation of Akia is through taking cuttings. So you can actually take a little stem tip cutting of the plant. I usually keep mine below 5 inches, about 4 to 5 inches long. And then what I'll do is I'll actually strip off and pull off the leaves, and actually try and scarify a little bit at the bottom. You can see how some of the bark has ripped off. That's actually kind of good, because that actually will help to stimulate the roots to emerge out of the scarred area. And what we'll do is we'll take this cutting and then we'll put it into a little plug tray. And I'm not going to stick it too deep. I'll probably only stick it in about 1 inch into the soil, like that. And then I'll just pack it in there. And to actually help stimulate the root development, a lot of the times we'll dip it into a rooting hormone, like a liquid rooting hormone that will increase the chances of healthy roots developing out of the cut stem. And it'll also shorten the time that the plant will take before it's ready. So if we don't use a rooting hormone, a lot of times more than 50% of the cuttings will actually die. And it'll take over 6 months for it to develop roots. If we use the rooting hormone, we'll get closer to maybe 70% of the plants will take root, but within 3 to 4 months.